Sorry, Dr. Potter. I think you were talking, but your connection was very bad for about 10 seconds. So,
can you hear me now? How
yes.
does it sound?
Yeah, now
Okay.
it's good.
Yeah, the internet in my area went out completely, so I had to drive to the local airport, which is the last place that still has internet. So I kind of parked in my car, all set up next to the antenna.
Way to adapt and overcome.
So if for some reason it doesn't work properly, please let me know.
Absolutely.
All right, we'll give it just a minute here. And Nick, are you taking minutes?
I wasn't planning to, but I can do that if you need me.
Okay.
So Todd, this is Angie.
Hi, Angie.
Hi, just for those on the phone, Angie Albee, Oregon Psilocybin Services. We have the agenda template, which we're recording the roll call and any vote counts that are taken with a timestamp and kind of we're capturing that information. As far as in-depth meeting minutes, we're not at this time, but that's what we're able to offer right now.
Yeah, I can jot down notes, Todd, so that you can focus on kind of leading the meeting, and then I'll send them to Angie and you afterwards, and Nick.
Thanks. I think the meat of the meeting is of course going to be Dr. Potter's presentation. But first, some housekeeping. Let's go ahead and take roll call. Angela Carter.
I am here.
Rachel Knox.
Here.
Thank you. Tom Jean.
Here.
Ali Hamadeh.
Here.
Jesse Euling.
Here.
And Rebecca Roca. And Chris Stouffer.
I'm here.
And of course, Athir and myself, the co-chairs, are both present. And I think we're having difficulty tracking down the minutes. They weren't included in today's agenda. So let's skip that. We'll approve 2 minutes next meeting if need be, and dive right into our new format in the agenda that you have attached, which starts off with some subcommittee updates in recognition of the fact that not everyone who attends this call can attend all of the others. And so the intent here is to just have a very brief minute or two update from each of the committee chairs. If there's a committee chair that's not on this call, Jesse Sweet has graciously offered to give that update as well as the OHA program update. Rachel, would you like to give an update of what's been going on with the Equity Committee?
Absolutely. So for the past 2 meetings, we've been on the subject of training, and we're working through a set of recommendations to OHA for OAR that attempted to answer how, right? How do we institutionalize and codify the ways facilitator training programs demonstrate equity? So many questions have been asked and answered at this point, and based off of last meeting's feedback, my role now is to make sure that we have properly adopted the feedback into the set of recommendations, and next meeting next week we'll review and approve to advance our recommendations to the general board. One thing that has been brought up and very minimally discussed in subcommittee meeting, although we'll start to spend more time on that, is the idea of a social equity plan for prospective training programs and license holders, right? Our statute doesn't direct the creation of a social equity program or ways to support social equity programming. And so we thought this might be a way to engage operators directly in working to achieve equity. So that's going to be a big project in our subcommittee. And we look forward to fleshing all that out.
Thank you. Jesse, you want to give a brief update on the products committee?
Yeah, thanks. Hi, everybody. Jesse Euling. We on the product subcommittee have just wrapped up our external speaker series, and that was really fun. We had a number of great speakers come visit with us, and we've been talking a lot about, well, learning from them, and then also having discussions through question and answer and open discussion format about some of the early topics that we're going to need to address. So species diversity. Of the hundreds of species of fungi that produce psilocybin, have the genes to do that, are capable of doing that, which species are we talking about suggesting and why? Product diversity, manufacturer product diversity. Within those species, how are we going to suggest manufacturers cultivate those tissues? So to remind you, a lot of fungi make mushrooms, not all, fun fact. But from a manufacturer standpoint, one option is to grow simply mushrooms and deal with those. Another is to cultivate hyphae. So these are the kinds of long hair-like cells that mushrooms are made of, and you can grow those in a liquid culture and other ways. Those are two ways, just as examples. So again, the 10,000 foot view is what species, what manufacturer products, and what cultivation conditions are going to be safe and effective, and what are not, and why. So we are in conversation state. We're hoping in our next meeting to do some formal voting and bring those suggestions to the board in the September meeting. And we're pivoting our conversations now with the addition, excuse me, of our ORLAT partners to testing labs. How are these testing labs going to be implementing protocols to ensure sorry, that whatever species we use and cultivation techniques we adopt or suggest, that those products are accurately quantified for concentration of psilocybin, and how that translates into product consistency and consumer safety. So what kinds of protocols they need, what kinds of equipment, how this is done, elucidating some of those questions. So again, from the top down, we're working on species diversity, manufacturer product diversity, pivoting now to testing dynamics, what kinds of technologies and expertise we need there, and hoping to have some microphone space at that September meeting to have some of these early discussions.
Wonderful. Thank you. Mason, you want to give a brief update on the licensing committee?
Yeah, thanks. So lately we've been working on a code of conduct for facilitators, an informed consent document for clients, and some facility requirements for service centers. But at our meeting tomorrow, we're going to vote on a lot of interesting issues. For example, whether or not we recommend group administration sessions and some details surrounding outdoor administration and requirements for outdoor areas of service centers. And so that will be a really interesting discussion.
Thank you. And I don't see a chair for the training committee. Forgive me if I'm overlooking. Oh, Angela. Oh, please. Sorry. Can you give us the update?
Of course. So we have been working for the last couple of meetings on sort of some questions that were posed to us by Jesse Sweet. What are the objective criteria for licensure? What are some things that facilitators should not do in practice? What are the screening considerations, standards for referral, things like that. And we also had Mary Cosamano come speak to us at the last meeting. And then we continued the discussion We've also been working on a couple of, which we discussed yesterday at the full board meeting, a couple of training surveys. The one that we went ahead with yesterday was for facilitator training programs. The other one will be for folks who are interested in getting licensed as facilitators. So that will continue in the next few sessions. And then we also made a decision around facilitation, whether we would have a single track or dual track. The decision was made that we would focus on a single track of training. And I believe that that is the end of my update.
Wonderful, thank you. Jesse, you want to fill us in on what's been going on from an OHA standpoint?
Thank you. For those of you listening on the phone, this is Jesse Sweet with OHA. I think the subcommittee chairs have given a pretty accurate picture of what we're doing. We're also hiring, which is exciting for Angie Albee and myself. There are 2 positions outstanding right now, a program analyst and a dedicated administrative support specialist. I'd like to thank Nick Riley for all that he's done, but we've really been borrowing him from his regular job. So we're excited to have some full-time support. And I'd like to turn it over to Angie Albee for any other program updates that you would like to add.
Yeah, thank you, Jesse. For those on the phone, this is Angie Albee from Oregon Psilocybin Services. Yeah, Jesse mentioned that we're doing hiring and it's very exciting. We're hoping to hire and onboard some team members very soon. So I will keep you all posted on the status of that news as we move forward. There will be many positions that we're recruiting for as we build out our team, and I'll just make sure you're always in the loop and sending those recruitments your way or those announcements your way. Another thing I just wanted to mention, thank you, Angela, for bringing this to my attention this morning, but many of you will begin receiving emails in Workday welcoming you to your position on the board, which you've been serving on since March, and also informing you that you have some training to do. I'll be sending out emails and keeping you in the loop. There are 3 required trainings that all board members and officials have to take. And so please don't panic. We are getting you uploaded into our system appropriately. It's part of our process, and I will help navigate you through all of that. So if you do receive that email and you're having troubles getting in and you need more information, I will happily walk you through that. And I'm working on the back end with our human resources department and our leadership team to get kind of a process document. So you also have that to use. So I will look forward to hearing from any of you that need some additional support there. And thank you, everyone, for all of your hard work.
Well, thanks so much. That brings us to the very exciting highlight of our agenda today. Our first guest speaker, Dr. Del Potter, who comes with an extensive history of research and developing various compounds and also psilocybin, and a unique lens that the research subcommittee unanimously voted to invite. Dr. Potter, the floor is yours.
Okay, I'll go ahead and share my screen. So thank you very much for inviting me. I hope I can shed some light on some things. What's interesting is that so much of what is taking place in Oregon touches upon various areas of expertise that I have and areas of interest that I have. Incidentally, these are 2 of my latest genetic creations. left, L mark 19 on the right, but we'll get into that. So I received my PhD in 1980 in medical anthropology from a joint program with the Berkeley Department of Anthropology and UCSF Medical School. I specialized in psychiatric anthropology, ethnopsychopharmacology, which was sort of a newly developed field at the time, and neuropharmacology. I had postgraduate training in chemical engineering at UC Berkeley and clinical training at the San Francisco Psychoanalytic Institute. I conducted extensive postgraduate ethnographic fieldwork in Ecuador, Brazil, Colombia, and Mexico. I was originally really focused on the psychohistory and personality development of the shamanic practitioner, what commonalities there were in that psychohistory across different societies. Also focused on shamanic ceremony and ritual, and what I characterized as indigenous psychotherapeutic practice. I was hoping during the course of my research that I would really learn something that would help inform our approaches in Western psychotherapy and perhaps provide a different frame other than psychology and psychiatry for psychotherapeutic treatment. As time went on, I became more and more focused on the ethnopsychopharmacology aspect and the phytochemistry of shamanic pharmacopoeia, what was in the shamanic formulation, and what was unique about it, again, with the idea of how it might benefit Western pharmaceutical science. Created a database of indigenous psychoactive botanicals that Richard Evan Schultes used in his examination of psychedelic botanicals. As you know, during the course of my research, gradually research into psychedelic compounds kind of fell out of favor. And I began working in cannabis. And about 6 years ago, I joined Leaf Holdings when Leaf Management wanted to design a pharmaceutical facility for cannabis manufacturing at their 15-acre campus in Willits, California. And during this process, I really wanted to re-envision the way manufacturing takes place with a fully automated production line and a scaled to look at really where the bottlenecks and pinch points were and scale accordingly. Leaf is in the process of becoming the first CGMP cannabis manufacturing facility in the US. I really, the whole time I was doing this type of design and implementing it, I really wanted to see if we could really raise the bar on cannabis manufacturing to a pharmaceutical level and really take advantage of producing cannabis as medicines. As part of this design process, I developed new patented proprietary IP for the remediation of pesticides and color in cannabis extracted product. Here's a quick picture of the facility at Leaf, just to give you an idea of the scale. If you see on the left, there's a beige building. That's where an explosion-proof structure for alcohol storage. That alcohol is pumped into the building, used for extraction, redistilled back out, and comes back out into the same storage facility in one giant sort of closed loop. And in the process of using that alcohol for extraction in that giant closed loop, we lose about 5% of the alcohol every time it makes that journey from the storage facility and back. So we were able to get extremely efficient. This is the 3-stage distillation apparatus I designed for purification of cannabis tincture. Now, one of the things I should say is a tremendous amount of this is extremely applicable to extraction and manufacturing of mushroom product. So a lot of it is sort of directly translatable. So this is a 3-stage process where lower boiling points and terpenes are taken off in the first stage, undesirables are pulled out in the second stage, and then a final polishing takes place in the final stage. Again, something that would lend itself complex as well. This shows an example of the a lab bench example of the device I developed for remediating pesticides and remediating color. And let me just see if I can get it going here. So this is the lab bench model. It was designed in such a way as to create a hydrodynamic effect, which forces the solution over the media. And this is taking place in real time. The way it's pulling color out, it also is able to surgically go in and pull out pesticides as well. So thus far in my research, I've been able to get 15 different classes of pesticides completely surgically removed and leaving all the active principle and all of the cannabinoid profile completely intact. So in the same way that we can take out color, we also are able to take out pesticides. And pretty much keeps getting lighter and lighter in real time there. So this is the industrial instrument that I built from that lab bench model. I'm obviously a much larger instrument. Media is put into that device on the left. It spins at a super high RPM, and that high shear action is what really allows us to get in and remediate both color and pesticides. Here's a sort of overview of how the system works. All of this is performed automatically. The tank on the left fills automatically, and then the process begins as soon as the tank is filled. And then as it actually has a computer color matching. So as soon as the tincture gets to the right color, it automatically goes to the next stage. Same with pesticides. So I'm currently Chief Scientific Officer and founder at Aya Biosciences, where we're focused on the development of novel psychedelic therapeutics. Aya takes a very traditional pharmaceutical approach to this, where we are hoping to develop these novel compounds to have better safety profiles, less adverse side effects, and more targeted or improved efficacy. We are currently working on developing analogs of a short-acting psychedelic compound, 5-methoxy-DMT. Our analogs are orally active, which is kind of unique. Usually this compound has to be delivered either intravenously, smoked, or inhaled in order to survive first pass metabolism at the liver. And this is fairly unique to have an orally active version of this compound. So our hope here is to be able to develop compounds that are more accessible to marginal clinical populations, the elderly, those indications that currently are not targets for psychedelic treatment, and less utilization of clinical resources. The idea being that if we can accomplish in a shorter period of time what it takes psilocybin 8 to 10 hours to accomplish, then we're ahead in terms of our utilization of clinical resources. Now, I was trying to think about what in my background would be most useful for the committee and for the board. I believe that this is a historic opportunity to shape both regulation and scientific understanding, as I'm sure everybody here realizes. And the Oregon project really does touch on many of the areas in which I've been working. So that would include an anthropological examination of indigenous therapeutic models, the phytochemistry of psychedelic botanicals. I have a long history in commercial cultivation of psilocybin containing mushrooms, both at the lab level and at a more commercial level. Have been engaged with botanical extraction, commercial manufacturing process, and analytical and process chemistry. And am also very focused on pharmaceutical formulation and drug delivery systems. What I'm hoping is that from this presentation, looking or to provide a white paper or any kind of background materials, I'm happy to do that. Again, I feel like this is pretty much a historic opportunity, and any way I can contribute, I want to contribute. So I'm hoping that from this presentation, maybe I can get some direction to even go back and provide even more materials. I have produced a bibliography that is sort of slanted to the decolonization, reciprocity, diversity aspects of the anthropological critique. Also focuses on, I have as part of that bibliography, information and anthropological resources for local indigenous groups. And I'm trying to make that bibliography as inclusive as possible for the very broad aims and ambitious aims of the Oregon Project. So as I was thinking about reviewing kind of how the research that I've done among Mazatec and Yanomami communities might benefit the committee, I really began to reflect upon the idea of relevancy and really started thinking, well, how relevant is my discussion of psychotherapeutic approaches in Latin America? How relevant is that to our situation in Oregon? And I began to think what is probably a more useful endeavor is to really talk about how the Oregon Psilocybin Board and the Health Authority is engaging and being informed by indigenous groups in Oregon. And I know that the board very thoughtfully begins each session with recognition of the fact that it's all taking place on indigenous land and in the context of previous indigenous occupation in the area. But what I couldn't really find in my look kind of at what the equity subcommittee is doing and what the board is doing in general is a fully and clarified process of our engagement and representation for indigenous communities, both inside of Oregon, but outside of the tribal territories as well. And so I was kind of looking around for a fully articulated plan really for that engagement. And I haven't really been able to find one. And please correct me if it's something I've missed. I don't know that this is really the job of the equity subcommittee to reach out to indigenous groups. I think it's really something that needs to take place from the Oregon Health Authority to seek counsel from indigenous groups on their engagement in the process of rulemaking, but then also how their communities can most benefit from this type of treatment. So it's very important to set up very continuous lines of communication and structures for not only the original engagement, but also throughout the duration of the program. And in general, it's been my understanding that the process of developing that engagement is as important as the product of engagement itself. When I worked among the Mazatec, I wanted to begin a process of collection of psychedelic botanicals, but the thought was in the back of my mind during that whole process that there could be a point further down the line where these botanicals become extremely valuable and maybe they become commercialized. So I spent about a year reaching out to a council of Mazatec elders and constructed a public trust corporation that all the members of the community kind of bought into, particularly the Council of Elders. And what the sort of the mandate of that public trust corporation was to ensure that if there was any commercialization of the collections that I had made further down the line, that commercialization would be So this has always been kind of a focus of mine, being able to build a kind of equity and reciprocity into the process, both of research and of this type of project. Oops. Having a little trouble here. Let's see. So I went ahead and did some research on Indigenous groups in Oregon and what federally recognized Indigenous groups there were. The map on the left are language divisions, but on the right are the federally recognized tribes. I began a process of kind of reaching out to them just to find out what their understanding was of the psilocybin project in Oregon. And I've also reached out to groups that are concerned with Native American studies and with studies of Indigenous groups in general, to try and see what lines of communication there were and what resources and stakeholders there might be to continue the process. So this is a list of the tribal websites. So what I found that was unusual was that there doesn't appear to be any mention of the use of psilocybin containing mushrooms in the anthropological literature or historical accounts in Oregon. Anthropologists may not have known to ask about use, but with the abundance of psilocybin containing mushrooms in Oregon, it's hard to imagine that there wasn't an association or knowledge of these mushrooms among Indigenous groups. So there may be an opportunity here, maybe as part of this project, to develop original research that documents cultural practice with mushrooms. And that investigation could form the foundation for a legal claim to contemporary religious use. So that is a program of advocacy that, you know, the board could consider. And so I just wanted to kind of bring that to everyone's attention. Rather than speak specifically about the details of both either Mazatec or Yanomami ritual and ceremonial practice, I wanted to give kind of a broad overview of what I think are the fundamental differences between Western approaches and Indigenous approaches to this type of healing. I like to give the example of, you know, if we break our arm in Western society, usually what happens is you go to the doctor fixes your arm, and you're sent on your way. In an Indigenous society, the first question that would be asked would be, why did you break your arm? Were you having an argument with your immediate kinship group? Was there some kind of conflict that caused you to be distracted, that caused you to break your arm? Did you violate a moral order, you know, a moral taboo, and you're feeling guilty about it, and that's distracting you? Are you out of balance with the natural order or the cosmological order? These are the kind of questions that an Indigenous practitioner would ask. They would go ahead and fix one's arm, but the treatment wouldn't stop there. It would extend beyond that treatment into all aspects of the individual's existence, his relationship to immediate kinship, the community, and beyond. The other thing that I think is really, I think, applicable here is the way shamanic formulation and treatment is constructed for the individual. I was surprised really to find out the level of detail that went into pharmacological preparation. The shaman would take into consideration the existential situation of the individual, what exactly the disease process was, what immediate social relationships, community, all of these factors would actually go into a pharmacological preparation. And the way it was prepared and expressed for the individual. So to summarize then, Western medicine resources are directed to a very narrow indication, but when that initial indication is resolved, the intervention is complete. In Indigenous practice, we have a multifaceted examination of the individual's being in the world and an examination of how does kinship, community, the natural and cosmological order affect the individual's dislocation, and how can change be initiated on multiple levels with different access points besides simply what's in front of you. A key concept in Indigenous society, which kind of amplifies this approach to the individual, is this idea of balance. When I began working in Indigenous societies, I began working specifically with shaman, but I came to understand that there is a complementary social structure to the shaman of people who practice witchcraft and poisoning. So usually the way the society is organized is the shaman is opposed by someone who practices witchcraft at the level of the shaman. And underneath them are herbalists or poisoners who are enlisted for supernatural interactions. So what this really does is it provides a place for everyone in the society. If they see, if an individual has either sociopathic or psychopathic tendencies, they tend to be routed to a mentorship with either a poisoner or someone who practices witchcraft, rather than just isolated and restricted from society. There's an attempt to find a place for everybody in society, and all of this contributes to a kind of social balance. These are the kind of things that I think could possibly inform an approach, a more enlightened approach to psychotherapy in Western society. So I kind of wanted to end here and start questions and answers because I'd really like to see what you guys would like me to focus on.
Dr. Potter, thank you so much. Would you mind ending the sharing of your show so we can see all the tiles?
I'll send that out, and I'll send out the bibliography and some other resources that I've been able to collect, and hopefully that can inform the committee's work.
That's wonderful. If you could just unshare your screen, we'll be able to see each other better in the conversation. Thank you so much. Let's have direct questions from research subcommittee members as well as psilocybin advisory board members. And then Nick and Jesse, I believe we're going to have time for public comment. So eventually we'll open for public comment if the public would have questions for Dr. Potter as well.
Yeah, I have a few questions if it's okay if I start.
Please.
Yeah, so, thanks for speaking, first of all. Really appreciate your insights and your expertise. I think it's one of the things I think that's potentially really unique is that you kind of have your foot in two worlds. And so that kind of may help with sort of that dual perspective. So one of the things I'm really interested in is the, some of the details of like the therapeutic models and particularly questions of, you talked about, balance being an important issue. So I assume when a shaman deems someone to be out of balance in some way, that is potentially an indication for treatment. So one of the things I'm curious is, what are the signs they look for when someone's out of balance? And, maybe a little bit about the language that's used or how it's talked about. I'm also interested in what it's not used for, right? So when do shamans say, oh, this is not an appropriate situation to use this? I'm sort of curious, because we have a lot of language around that. And so I'm just sort of curious what indigenous practices are around, when to not use it. And finally, what do they do when it doesn't work? I assume in some cases it doesn't work or doesn't have the desired effect. So how do they deal with that?
Yeah, so these are very small groups. They're very much operate on sort of a face-to-face basis. When conflict emerges, everybody knows about it. It's something that's shared throughout the group. And that's usually when the shaman will intervene. Other than that, individuals present themselves, I'm suffering from this, I have a problem with this. And these can range from everything from a disease process to, I'm having trouble with hunting. I've been unsuccessful for months now, and I'm not sure what's wrong. So it can range beyond what we would normally consider, sort of a disease process or a conflict process, and ranges into, more or less all aspects of life. And the shaman is generally amenable to trying to help any of those kinds of difficulties. Generally speaking, this is a proclivity that is passed on through generations. So there are shamanic lineages where an individual who is recognized as being successful at this passes that lineage on to the next generation. So they have sort of a long history of success in treatment that kind of is the context for what they do. Now, whether or not to some degree there is sort of a placebo effect where people are believing that the treatment is going to be effective, rarely do we see sort of an ineffective treatment. There is usually a kind of resolution that is culturally acceptable, whatever it may be. But generally speaking, they are regarded as successful, or they just don't last very long in that context. The other part of your question, when do they know not to intervene? Because they're extremely respected and their power is widely acknowledged. Generally, their opinion is called for in just about every case. There's a political dimension to this, as well as simply a healing dimension. That is, people will come as a group to a shaman and say, we've been having a long period of struggle with this other group. Can you suggest any way we can resolve this difficulty? I mean, so it actually ranges beyond the medical and into the political on many occasions. And you find shamans sort of wearing two hats, where they're almost in a role of being a chief as well as being a healing practitioner. So the boundaries are not as strictly defined as we would define them. Any kind of trouble is fair game for a shaman.
But and just to clarify, and psilocybin being one of the tools that they may use in really any of the situations that you mentioned and others.
The groups that I worked with in Latin America were more inclined to use ayahuasca and ayahuasca rituals. They also used a form of DMT almost on a daily basis that they would use quite a bit of this throughout the day, pretty much. As for psilocybin use, most of my research on psilocybin comes from my work with the Mazatec, and that in that case, the appreciation or the understanding of what mushrooms can provide is almost in a religious context. There is a veneer of Christianity put over what is essentially an indigenous religion, and when in exact people or having problems with a relative, or there's something that they can't resolve, that's an occasion for a psilocybin session.
Thank you.
I have a question. Hi, I'm Christopher.
Hi, Chris.
Thanks, Dr. Potter. I'm fascinated by this idea of the shadow shaman, or what you're calling, witchcraft or the poisoner. I'm wondering if you can say more about what the societal role is for people on that side of things, like witchcraft or poisoner, and then taking that further, if you have any either warnings or suggestions about how that might manifest in our Oregon model.
I'm not sure how it would manifest, but the notion can be fairly elaborated in the social structure of an indigenous society. That is, you actually have almost like a pyramid where at the bottom are sort of low-level people who are on one side or the other, and that as you move up the pyramid, you get to the shaman on one side, and the individual who is sort of the shadow figure on the other side has a number of names, different ways that they're described. In California, they describe an individual as a Walepo. They were described in the literature as appearing on a whirlwind. And what they had managed to do as part of their persona was to create, they would arrive on stilts. They'd learned to walk on stilts, so they were much bigger and more formidable. They had a condor cape, a cape entirely made out of condor feathers, which they would whirl in a like almost like a tornado when they showed up. And so there was sort of a ritual position that an individual who began as a young person to exhibit either sociopathic or psychopathic tendencies would gradually be steered in the direction of a mentorship with one of these individuals. And what's really interesting is oftentimes that individual has like an alter identity. So it could be someone in the tribe who doesn't reveal himself as that. So it's a difficult process to direct someone to that individual, but everybody kind of knows. So when that person is directed to that individual, the structure, the ceremonial structure, puts sort of a brake on their behavior. That is, they have to go through this elaborate process of acquiring the persona, of actually entering into that personality, which sort of limits their ability to be impulsive. So by having this ritual context, by having this ceremonial position, having that cultural context allows for some cultural control over the individual, so that they don't express it out of bounds, say the way we might end up with a serial killer or somebody who's just wantonly killing people. The situation is so ritualized in an indigenous society that it's very difficult for them to get out of control in that sense.
Thank you. That's so interesting. Yeah.
Yeah, but on the other side, we have, the shaman, who is completely selfless and devoted to the community, almost like an opposite type of personality. It's been suggested that that the shaman actually has a lot of interpersonal struggles. They go through generally a period in adolescence where they're lost, where what we might even describe as schizophrenia or bipolar disorder. They become dislocated. They can't find themselves. they are able to understand, what how to channel really the power that they have in a constructive way, and rather than letting it dominate them. And this seems to be almost a universal process in Indigenous societies.
Yeah, are you familiar at all with Phil Borges?
Yes, sure.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely.
Dr. Potter, I've been trying to be quiet because I have about 1 million questions and wanted to give other people a chance to speak, but I'll throw one out.
Okay.
This was just an absolutely fascinating presentation. Thank you. I particularly appreciated your going into detail on the tribes of Oregon and the evidence or lack of it for indigenous use of mushrooms in Oregon. I actually tried to find this information when we were doing our rapid review, and all I could find was Andrew Weil's 1977 treatise on psychedelics in the Pacific Northwest, and
Right.
he comes out and says they don't use them. And so I'm really curious what advice that you have on in terms of integrating our local tribal cultures. Clearly, we need to make sure that there's equitable distribution in a group of people who are always at risk for being at the back of the line in terms of medical resources, it seems. So there's that piece. But how else, what other advice do you have for integrating this perspective if this is new to tribal cultures?
Well, I believe that, it's something that can't be imposed from the outside. What has to happen sort of organically is the development of lines of communication to these indigenous groups. These are sovereign nations, right? And they should be approached, with that in mind. So I believe at the highest level, I believe it should be an initiative from the Oregon Health Authority to actually begin to set up the lines of communication. And, there's a twofold process here. There may be some information as yet undisclosed about indigenous use of mushrooms in this area. It's hard for me to imagine that, indigenous groups that know every flora, fauna, every detail about their behavior from A to Z would somehow have missed psilocybin mushrooms. It seems like an incredible stretch. That means that in many cases, the information is sacred. It may be sacred. It may be something that isn't discussed with outsiders. The only advantage that I could see is that it could form the basis for this contemporary claim for religious use, which would allow them to be able to access in their own communities, access these substances. So I think it would be, if we are to find that information, the only way to find it is through contact with those communities and with them developing, their own research project to find it out. Oftentimes anthropologists were puritanical. They were products of their time, and as a result, they probably, didn't think much of mushroom rituals. But I'm sure that everything from Amanita muscaria to all the psilocybin containing mushrooms had some medical purpose. But again, to kind of go back to, I think it's something that the Oregon Health Authority should undertake to establish a direct line of communication to each sovereign group and ask those communities, describe the project and ask those communities how they would like to participate, how they would like to own the process, and really begin an examination of does the project in Oregon hold some benefit for those communities? It's not something that I can decide or anybody can decide, but it has to come internally from actually process, and then, because within those communities, there are a number of smaller political groups who each have their own agenda. So it is a difficult and time-consuming process, but one that has to be undertaken as soon as possible.
Thank you so much. That's extremely helpful. And I'm wondering, I don't mean to put anyone on the spot, if OHA or others on the call know if at any point during the development of Measure 109, we reached out to the Northwest Portland Area Indian Health Board or others, and if we should still go there.
Thank you, Todd. For those of you on the phone, this is Angie Albee with the Oregon Psilocybin Services at OHA. I can't speak to the campaign, but I can say that in August, I attended our OHA Tribal Monthly meeting and presented to the 9 federally recognized tribes in Oregon. I'll continue to stay in touch with them, throughout this process. We also have a tribal affairs director within the Oregon Health Authority that is helping to navigate both by sending job announcements out and trying to bring people in at every aspect of the work we're doing, as well as just getting information out there and staying connected. I will also say that the equity subcommittee has a tribal member that represents the Warm Springs tribe and is participating in many discussions that we're grateful for. And the governor's office is prioritizing the tribal member seat on this advisory board so that we do have some representation. And so I'm looking forward to that over the next few months. And I'll continue to keep everyone updated as we move forward. But thank you very much for the presentation, and I hope that's helpful.
Thanks so much. Are there other questions?
Yeah, I had a question for Del. I was curious, as you brought up different.
Shoot. I can't hear a question. Did I miss it?
Sorry, hi, I'm here.
Okay, I missed it. I'm sorry.
It's okay. I had a question specifically on the different genetics that you had found within these indigenous groups and what you have gathered as like different effects to different things, or different genetics have done different things.
I have over 300 species and varieties isolated. And I would say in general that, I'm going to just give a kind of an overview statement. The primary active principle in psilocybin containing mushrooms turns out to be psilocin and psilocybin. There are a number of other minor compounds, many of which do not cross the blood-brain barrier, but they are active at the 5-HT2A receptor. And we have 5-HT2A receptors throughout our gut and other parts of our body, besides simply in the brain. So there is an effect from these compounds. We're just not sure at this point what that effect might be. What we see generally is that the minor compounds don't occur in amounts sufficient to cause an effect. So again, just to kind of run through them, we see baecysteine, norbaecysteine. Neither of those cross the blood-brain barrier, but again, they could have some activity in other parts of the body. Then we have iruganesin, which was originally discovered in one mushroom, Inocybe iruganesin, and was later found in psilocybin-containing mushrooms, of cubensis, Psilocybe cubensis. It appears that Psilocybe cubensis, and I think this is kind of an important point. Psilocybe has geographic distribution. And it seems that whenever it gets into a particular niche area, a niche ecological area, it begins to differentiate itself slightly in terms of the alkaloids that it produces. So just about all of the alkaloids that are represented in other mushroom species are also represented in psilocybe cubensis in general. We don't tend to see the wood lovers paralysis phenomenon with psilocybe cubensis. So that I think is a tremendous advantage. But anyway, running through some of these compounds, we have baeocystine, norbaeocystine, irugonesin, which was of interest at one point, but again, it's a quaternary amine and doesn't cross the blood-brain barrier. So it's unlikely to affect the contour of the psilocybin experience. The other compounds that are of interest are norpsilocin, which has more activity at 5-HT2A receptor. And I should say, I'm sure everyone here understands that the indication of psychedelic activity is activity at the 5-HT2A serotonin receptor. That is sort of the go, no go for psychedelic activity. So norpsilocin appears to have more functional activity at 5-HT2A than psilocybin or psilocin. Anecdotal accounts of the experience suggest that it's a more intense experience, it's a more colorful experience, and it's a shorter lasting experience. So in terms of psychedelic compounds, norpsilocin is certainly of interest. And if it occurred in amounts sufficient to cause an effect, then it would have some effect on contouring the overall experience. But we don't really see it occurring in those amounts in the specimens that have been collected thus far. One other set of compounds that are of interest are also MAO inhibitors, such as harmine, harmaline, and tetraharmine, which have been discovered in some specimens of psilocybe cubensis from Eastern Europe. These are the same compounds that are used in ayahuasca to allow DMT to survive first pass metabolism at the liver and allow it to have an enduring effect in the ayahuasca experience. So MAO inhibitors will tend to intensify the experience as well as prolong it. So they prevent breakdown and degradation of the compounds, as well as intensifying the experience. There have been specimens in Mexico of psilocybe cubensis that have MAO inhibitors in them, some specimens in Eastern Europe. But again, in the specimens that have thus far been collected, we haven't seen amounts that would actually create an effect. They're there, but they don't seem to create or add to the effect of the psilocin or psilocybin. So this, I think, we have to be cautious about this whole notion of an entourage effect with psilocybin. This isn't cannabis. There aren't a number of active principles. There appear to be just one or two active principle compounds involved. And although there are others of interest, they tend not to occur in amounts sufficient to cause an effect.
Great, thank you so much for answering my question. And it kind of ties into the indigenous piece that you presented. Do the tribes know of these compounds, and is that kind of why they marry ayahuasca and psilocybin in their ceremonies?
Well, usually they're separate types of experiments. I mean, experiences. They're separate ceremonies, generally speaking. They tend not to combine psilocybin with with ayahuasca. Ayahuasca is usually like one group does ayahuasca. But what's interesting is the Mazatec use psilocybin sometimes in conjunction with Salvia divinorum, which has lysergic acid amides in it. I can tell you from experience that the amides are somewhat toxic, and I myself personally don't really see how they really contribute to the psilocybin experience. So that's just my own interpretation. But in certain cases, that's the only area I know of combination approaches like you're describing.
So I have an additional question, but I want to see if anybody else has any questions first. Okay. So the other question I have is, it sort of sounded like a lot of the settings that the psychedelics are used in sort of indigenous communities are where it's sort of smaller groups where the shaman knows a lot of the people. And so, I think the environment is going to be quite different in a lot of settings in Oregon where, sort of we live in larger groups and the treatment provider is, and in many cases, not going to know the person nearly as well as I think a typical shaman would. So I'm just curious. I mean, I imagine there may be groups with shamans that use them in a setting where there are larger groups and they may not know the person as well. So I'm just curious if you have any comments about that. And the reason I ask is because it really, we know in psychiatry that it really affects the psychodynamics of the interaction. How well the two people know one another. And so I'm just sort of curious about, what you know about that.
Yeah, there are increasingly large group experiences that are more contemporary in origin. These ayahuasca church settings are usually group settings, and in my opinion, I think it's best for a practitioner to, just from my experience, to understand a great deal about the individual who is about to take a psychedelic compound. I think that a preparation period, a period where you come to understand. Otherwise, I think you're just kind of asking for trouble. I have a sort of a holistic view of the way people operate in the world. I don't simply see psychiatric indications as caused intrapsychically. I think that there's an element of social relations with them. And I think that it's important for a practitioner to really explore the social environment and the economic environment, every aspect of an individual's existential situation to really be well informed to prepare for this kind of experience. That is certainly the approach in indigenous societies. Having said that, I was really fascinated with the discussion from, I can't remember his name, but the guy from UCSF who does group work. I think there's a lot of potential for group interaction and group work, and for this to be a medium for resolving conflict in a group setting. I think it allows for buy-in from the immediate social network, and that helps to reinforce the treatment effect and the long-term duration of that effect, I think. So I think ultimately it's a beneficial approach. And I should say that also, generally speaking, these sessions are conducted in a group, not just with an individual. That is, there's like an audience, generally speaking. There are, if you can imagine, people, music, not music, but percussion and chanting is very much an aspect of all of these treatment situations. So you have a set of individuals who are sort of lieutenants of the shaman, who are creating a percussive environment and creating sort of an environment for the audience that's actually watching. And then, what the shaman is the one who can encounter the supernatural group that's doing the chanting and the drumming provides sort of a bridge to the shaman, and you know, although the average person can't encounter the supernatural in the same way that the shaman can, that having these people as intermediaries helps, you know, to involve them in the ritual.
Thank you.
So I have a question about extraction, if you don't mind.
No problem.
One of the challenges with extraction is that, you know, in addition to desirable compounds being concentrated, you have pesticides and other undesirable compounds being concentrated through the extraction process. I'm wondering what this looks like in terms of psilocybin extraction, what types of pesticides or other impurities might present themselves during the extraction process.
Yeah, I think it's probably suggested that that cultivation of psilocybin mushrooms align itself very closely with what takes place in cannabis in this particular area. That is a best practices for cultivation that excludes the use of toxic compounds or toxic pesticides, none of which really is necessary for mushroom cultivation. So I think articulating best practices that sort of align with what cannabis has would be really beneficial. None of those substances are really necessary for cultivation because you pasteurize generally the substrate. So it eliminates competing insects, microorganisms, all that sort of thing. So you really are an advantage really over cannabis because you're in a much more controlled environment. You know, the environment again is much more controlled, and an attempt is made for, you know, to keep it as sterile as possible. So I would suggest that analytical labs should be looking for the same pesticides, not necessarily agricultural pesticides. There are perhaps a more limited number of pesticides that are used with mushrooms. I would think that they would want to be looking for that. They want to be looking for heavy metals. Mushrooms are notorious concentrators of heavy metals, and they also do tend to concentrate pesticides as well. So I would suggest that the analytical component of the Oregon project has, you know, a mandate to, you know, look for pesticides similar to the way they look for it in cannabis, down to the parts per billion, ideally. And, you know, I think that's probably gonna, myself personally, this again is not cannabis. It is more of a pharmaceutical medicalization path that I see the manufacturing taking place on. So I think it will be a more stringent manufacturing process with that might best align itself with CGMP practices that allow for real scrutiny and prevention of any kind of problems. My thoughts.
Well, Dr. Potter, thank you so much for taking the time to share your wisdom here. This has been a fascinating hour. We will be able to access your slides, you said?
Yeah, I'll send out the slides. I'll send out the bibliography. And again, if there's something else you would like me to comment on, I'm happy to do that. I'm at the disposal of both the board and the committee.
All right, I am seeing from Nick that we don't have any requests for public comment, which leaves time for one more question. If someone wants to have the last
Todd,
question.
Hi, Todd, I'm sorry. This is Nick. I actually did just get one request.
Okay.
Whenever you're ready, Todd.
I'm set.
All right. Well, thank you so much, Dr. Potter. I appreciate it. Let's see, just to keep with the agenda, the next item on the agenda prior to public comment is discussion of any issues not on the agenda from board members, if there are board members that would like to comment. And I'll just raise one issue to say that yesterday we approved a slate of additional expert guest speakers, and wondering if those invitations are being sent out. And it's only been a day, but what the plan is for contacting and scheduling those speakers.
Thank you, Todd. Hi, everyone on the phone. It's Angie Albee with Oregon Psilocybin Services. Yes, we will be sending out those invitations and doing the scheduling. We will also probably have to get a refresh on contact information. So we'll be making sure we've got everyone's contact information, sending out emails, and I'll let you know if we need an email address along the way.
Great, thanks so much. Other general comments from board members?
No, just a resounding thank you to Dr. Potter for being with us today, and I think delivering a pretty necessary message.
And thank you, Dr. Knox, I'll note, for nominating Dr. Potter in the first place.
Thanks, Todd. And absolutely, I hope you can all see now why. Thank
Absolutely.
you.
If there are no other board member comments, let's open for public comment. Nick?
Thank you, Todd. We got a request for a public comment from Seth Austin. Go ahead, Seth.
Hi, Seth Austin. I'm a resident of Portland, and I was wondering if, I was wondering why we were necessarily pursuing the medical model. And another kind of side question is, if so, why are we going with the isolated compounds for that? For the reasons Dr. Potter described, I don't understand why it would need to be isolated if we know that it's safe. That being said, am also curious if it would be a point of interest to test the other alkaloids that are within mushrooms, given that we do have the power to pursue that within the group. That's my question. Thank you.
Is that question directed to me? I'll be happy to answer it, but I'm not sure it is.
Whoever would be able to answer it. Thank you.
You know, from my perspective, I would suggest that, we have a whole range of individuals with different medical and other types of needs that psilocybin can help with. And I believe that the approach that Oregon's taking of allowing for cultivated products alongside of manufactured products gives people the kind of choice that they're looking for. There will always be those people who just want to take a mushroom. They feel best about, sort of the holistic nature of taking a mushroom. But on the other hand, there will be those people who suffer, gastrointestinal problems as a result of taking mushrooms, who have gastric motility, that when the active principle is removed from the mushroom cell walls, they don't experience that same level of discomfort. Also, refining the compound allows for standardization and reformulation so that it becomes possible to match mushroom, psilocybin, the active principle, with the active principle of other functional mushrooms, creating essentially a combination type drug. All of that becomes possible with manufacturing. So the advantages of manufacturing are standardization, the ability to create these combination compounds, and to provide for those people who feel most comfortable with, a pharmaceutical product, they have that option.
Thanks so much. Mason Marks has a question.
Thanks. I just wanted to clarify, I think what Del Potter is saying, I think he's referring to, when he says medicalization, I think he's referring primarily to the manner of production. I just want to clarify that I don't think it's accurate to categorize the Oregon model as a medical model. I would describe it more as supervised adult use or something like that. So I think that the commenter might have been based on his comment. I think he was suggesting that the approach, generally speaking, was a medical model. I just kind of wanted to clarify that.
Thank you, Mason. And I was remiss in my initial call out for public Q&A, public comment, that there was a Q&A involved. And Nick kindly reminds us that the public comment period is not scheduled as a Q&A. It is intended for members of the public to provide their feedback. Thank you for understanding. Thank you for reminding me of the process, Nick. I appreciate that. Are there other public comments or comments from board members? If not, we will go ahead and adjourn with deep gratitude to Dr. Potter for taking the time to share with us.
My pleasure. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye-bye.